I'm Eric from Longbox Review.
I'm Peter from the Daily Rios, and this is Eric and Peter's Legion Project. All right, welcome to this first episode of what Eric and I are calling the Legion Project podcasts. We're just going to talk a little bit at the top here. We're going to give a little preamble, a little secret origin of what this podcast is about, and why we feel we want to talk about the Legion. So, Eric, how are you?
I'm good, Peter. Thank you. How are you?
I'm good. So this has been like a long time in the making, right?
Yeah.
Yeah, it was something that we kind of batted around. You know, we should talk Legion because we're both big Legion fans, Legion of Superheroes fans. And I guess I should say Legion of Superheroes because people might think we're talking Legion TV show. But no, that's not what we're talking about.
No, it's the better Legion.
Oh, have you seen Legion, the TV show?
No, I don't even need to.
Oh, why not? It's good. It's actually very good.
I've heard that, yeah.
Yeah. But again, this isn't the Legion TV show's podcast. So Legion of Superheroes, we're both big fans. I guess one of the times that I guested on your show, we talked about, you know, hey, we should do a Legion focus. But we could never really figure out where to start, right? Like that was the big thing. And I think one of my excuses was, oh, but Eric, I have so much Legion to read leading up to wherever it is we want to start talking about, right?
Well, yeah, and so when you mentioned that, and I know you, Peter, you'd like to go back to the beginning and work your way through and make these connections that, you know, to a legendary degree, you know, all the years I've listened to you on Comic Geek Speak and on your own show,
yeah,
that I went out and bought I was doing it anyway, but, you know, because I love the Legion, but I made sure that I went out and got all of the Showcase Presents black and white collections that DC put out over the years, so I could read all of those old Silver Age Legion comics leading up to, you know, what I consider the beginning of my Legion, which is the Superboy and the Legion series.
Oh, well, let's talk about that. What is your Legion? So around what issue did you start reading Legion?
It was in the 270s, somewhere in there.
Yeah, that's, you know, you had me on your show to do this like wide Legion of Superheroes spotlight, and I think I remember you saying that because I was jealous that you had started reading the Legion prior to the Great Darkness saga.
Oh yeah. So yeah, Legion 267 was one of my very first Legion comics. I know there was another one where the Legion, was it the League of Assassins? Is that what they called themselves? Went after the Legionnaires, which actually ties into what we're going to talk about here on this first episode. I don't remember what the issue was, but that was probably my first one, whatever that one was.
Did you get far in? You said you bought all those showcases. It's my fault. I guess I owe you some money. Did you get far on all of those? Or
oh no, I didn't even start them. They're sitting, they're sitting on my shelves still.
See, you have the same problem I do. You just it's that collector mentality, and I've had Legion issues for years, decades that have gone unread. You know, like I've read some of the first issues, but not, you know, some of their first appearances, but that's it, you know. And then I don't think I really, well, I started at Legion of Superheroes 304. So we're talking, what, 82, 83, 1982, 1983. Those were the issues that I was picking up off the shelf. And then, you know, as you do, you collect back issues. So I certainly have read the Great Darkness saga in back issues. But beyond that, like, there's maybe a handful of issues that I've read prior to the Great Darkness saga. There's a lot of Legion history, Mike Grell, Dave Cockrum, Jim Shooter, stuff that, you know, I might have read a reprint from DC Blue Ribbon Digest, or I might have read some random Mike Grell issue because it belonged to like my uncle, and then he gave me a Legion comic, you know. So I didn't really start reading the Legion until 304, and then I was pretty consistent for many, 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 many years. But like you said, I wanted to go back, and obviously you wanted to go back, but I guess we didn't do that. So that's okay.
One day.
Yeah. And I think that's important because I think that's something for this listeners should know about this podcast. Like, we're not trying to go Wikipedia annotation style, right? Like, this isn't a footnotes episode. This isn't, or like what I'm starting to do on the Daily Rios, these breakdown episodes. It's not like this massive, detailed, here's every little nugget of information. I think you and I just really are fans of these characters in this book, and we just want to talk about it.
So do you want to talk about, do you want to jump into what we're going to talk about for this episode, or is there more stuff more preamble here?
No, I think that's good. So that was the confusing part, right? That's what we couldn't figure out where to start. So why don't you let them know where we're going to start?
Well, we're going to start with Legion of Superheroes #1, the first new material #1 Legion of Superheroes issue that was ever published, from 1984. Cover date August 1984.
We sort of felt like that was a good starting point. Yes, there's a lot of Legion history prior to that, but you know, I'm a big fan of that 1984 run, you know, that's affectionately called the Baxter run. I'm a huge fan of it. I think it's one of the finest Legion runs. It stays pretty consistent throughout the entire run. I know we're both fans of the 5 Years Later run. Well, I'm a big fan. Have you read the 5 Years Later? I can't remember now.
Oh yeah, definitely.
Yeah.
That is one of my favorite runs of that. At least, you know, the beginning part of that 5 Year Later run that Giffen and company was doing. And I think it was during that Legion Spotlight episode that you and I did on my show when we were. It may have been off recording when we were talking about this, but it was a lot of, well, what you know, if we're going to do this, what are we going to talk about? Are we going to talk 5 Year Later or something else? And again, during that conversation that we were having, you were talking about this particular run, the Baxter run, mm-hmm. and I mentioned that there's a great amount of that after the beginning of it that I haven't read.
Oh, good, yeah, right.
Even though I have all the issues, I just haven't gotten around to reading all of them yet.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm, mm-hmm. You know, the 5 Years Later run, I think our hearts were in it to start there, but that one is really complicated. Like, I can't imagine somebody who has no idea what the Legion is. I can't imagine what they would think hearing two people talk about that and gush about like all the big ideas and the interesting concepts. Like, you know, with the Baxter run, it's a little bit more new reader friendly. I definitely want listeners to know that, like I said, we're not going to go annotation style with this. I'm just going to assume that you've read the issue and you want to hear people talk about it, or you haven't read the issue and you think maybe it might be something interesting to listen to. I don't think we're going to try to make this into like a new reader friendly kind of podcast. There are a bunch of other Legion podcasts, which I'll talk about in a second, that really go out of their way to help new listeners, and they explain a lot. You know, I'm one of those people that I don't, in this kind of podcast where I'm fairly certain every episode that we do, we're just going to cover one issue of the Legion. There's no such thing as spoilers, right? Because spoilers are, to me, are when you're having a casual conversation and you don't want to necessarily spill an interesting twist or whatever. But if you're talking about a comic book, if it says in the title, Legion of Superheroes #1, a detailed look at the first issue of the Baxter run, blah, 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 it's not a spoiler. It's a discussion. So I don't want to hold back our conversations if we mention like stuff that happens in the Great Darkness saga or stuff that happens even in the future, in issues down the road, if it just happens to come up. So, but I like this notion that this might be a series that you're going to find, you, Eric, are going to find new stuff with because you haven't read most of it. And it should be a fun conversation. These first episodes are always so they're trial runs. They're just like, let's see what happens. I'm not gonna, why I hate podcasts that come out the gate and they're like, oh, we have this detailed format and da da da. Okay, great, that's great. And there's nothing natural about it. Who knows? Who knows if this is gonna be interesting? Who knows what's gonna come out of it? But at the very least, it gives us a chance to listen. Or us a chance to talk about the Legion, which is something we've both wanted to do for a long time. And, that way we're not talking to ourselves. We can actually talk to one another.
Where do we go from here, Peter?
Well, I did mention the other Legion podcasts. I have 4 that I found. I don't know if you know any more. So there was one called the Super Future Friends that started in May of 2008, and there's only 38 episodes. But I loved that podcast. It was with Adriana and Kristen, I believe their names were. Where they went through the Legion in chronological order, but they were so funny and they came up with some really funny observations, and they weren't so beholden to like, oh, the Legion is great and you can't make fun of it. No, I loved it. I wish they would have kept that going. Have you listened to any of those episodes?
Well, because of you mentioned them before on your show, and I have listened to them, and you're right. They're quite enjoyable. It's a pity that they didn't continue.
Yeah. And they love the Legion, and I've met them at conventions. They're artists, creators, and I got a couple sketches from them, and you can find some Legion artwork online from them. And then in October 2008, the Legion of Substitute podcasters started, and they are still continuing to this day with episode 461. The hosts are Paul and Darren, I totally blanked on the other hosts, but they are all in with the Legion of Superheroes, and they jump around a lot. They sometimes talk about newer Legion stories, older Legion stories. They do interviews. I believe they probably looked at the Legion of Superheroes cartoon. So I mean, like, they are your one-stop shop for all the Legion talk.
They go pretty in depth on their discussions too.
Yeah, their episodes are usually no less than an hour. They're a great bunch of guys. I mean, they're all people that I knew from the old CGS days. Matt and Scott. Those were the other 2 I couldn't remember. So yeah, Darren, Matt, Scott, and Paul. They're from all over. Paul's from Canada. I think Scott's from Canada. Darren's down in Atlanta. I mean, if you just go to their website and hit a search for a storyline, a Legion storyline, or an interview, you're going to find something you're going to want to listen to there. So then in March 2014, there was a podcast called Eric and the Legion. It was kind of funny. It's like sort of like you.
But I never heard of this one.
Yeah, there's no new episodes past January 2016. At least I if my search is correct. So he didn't get too far. I think he was also doing like a chronological listing. And then February 2017, there's a podcast called The Legion Clubhouse, and they have 11 episodes so far. So that one is a little bit more recent, and they are still going. So
Peter, what do you think? So, like I said, there's a couple newer ones. We have a couple older ones. One that the Legion of Substitute podcasters has been going on for a while, and they continue to put out episodes. But hearing you talk about these newer ones, and the fact that we're doing this ourselves, what do you account for that? Why this resurgence in interest in the Legion of Superheroes?
Probably because there is no Legion of Superheroes comic right now.
So we're all just being nostalgic.
Yeah, maybe. And I mean, I think the Legion is one of those concepts that we, when we did that episode on your show about the Legion, which people should go listen to because that's a nice overview of what we feel about the Legion in general. I think it's just one of those concepts that either you really love it or you try to avoid it because you think it's like this impenetrable wall, sort of like trying to get into the X-Men universe sometimes. There's so much to talk about. I mean, we're not going back to the beginning. We're starting in 1984. There's so much to talk about. There's so much to latch onto. I'm sure, as we talk about this first issue, you and I are going to find different things that we like about this issue and these characters and concepts. The podcasting community is very large and wide, and there's a lot of stuff to talk about. I mean, God, there's probably about 50 Batman podcasts, but I only really found about 4 to 5 Legion podcasts, So why not one more?
Exactly. I do find it interesting too, being the age that I am and having started reading comics when I did. I have a lot of years behind me in terms of my Legion reading. Like we talked about before, I started around the 270s mark of the book, but it always strikes me as really cool that I don't know the age of the people that are doing these other podcasts. I'm merely assuming that they are younger than I am. That younger people are discovering these things that I have been reading for, now decades,
right?
Or have fallen in love with these concepts like the Legion of Superheroes. Right. So it's really cool that comics has that lasting power. These characters have that effect on people of various ages and backgrounds, and I just think that's really cool. That comics brings us together in a fashion, and I really love that.
Yeah. There's always something new to discover in the back issue bins or on the new release rack, someone might listen to this episode and go, "Wow, you know what? I've never read the Legion. I'm going to go read the Legion."
And they should.
And you can. This first storyline that we're going to cover has been traded in a trade called Eye for an Eye, fairly recent, in the past couple years, I want to say. And the storyline itself that we're reading is 5 issues long, but as I said, we're only going to do 1 issue per episode.
Which means, of course, that this could go on forever and ever and ever. That's
right. At least 63 episodes plus however many annuals there were for around this.
Oh, before the what, zero, was it 0 Hour? No,
that's for the 5 years later. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah.
The Baxter run is 63 issues plus I want to say 3 or 4 annuals.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. So.
Yeah, and Peter, it looks like that Eye for an Eye trade came out in 2007.
Oh, so
if Amazon is to be trusted.
Okay. I thought there was like a re-release after that.
Yeah, there might have been, and I'm shooting myself now for not getting it.
Well, you have the issues.
Even though I have the issues.
Don't double dip.
Oh, it's too late. It's too late.
Yeah. You want to just shut up and start talking about the actual book now?
Yeah. So I have, if you don't mind, Peter, I have here a description of the comic.
Awesome.
I don't know if this was taken from the solicitation back in the day or this came from something else. Mm-hmm. But I'm getting this from a particular website here. But I thought it would be kind of nice to throw that out there.
Okay.
So Legion of Superheroes, 1984, number 1. Here a villain, there a villain. Beginning a new era in the lives of the Legionnaires. The Legion's first deluxe format issue opens the door on a suspenseful, very mysterious, and exciting 5-part epic destined to be a classic. So this is why I like to read these things, Peter, because I always want to come back to this. Did they do their job? The Legion of Supervillains is back with a plan to destroy the Legion and the universe. Light Lass is kidnapped. The prisoners of Takron Galtos are broken out. Microlad makes trouble. Well, this is kind of weird. Chameleon Chief, Ron Carr, and other nasties battle our heroes. And Dreamgirl's lot is the worst, for she has had a vision that a Legionnaire will die.
That's pretty good. That's like hitting all the major beats of this first issue.
Yeah. It's kind of weird, though. But Microlad makes trouble. I mean, sure, I suppose. But considering what actually happens in the story, I'm like, someone might be a Microlad fan, I'm thinking. Or they're trying to make a little bit more out of it than... Yeah. Or, maybe I'm just not a Microlad fan. I don't know.
He's not... He's the less threatening of the Legion of Supervillains, I would think.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, that's a good synopsis. I mean, basically, this first issue is it's not necessarily putting you right in the middle of a story, but it definitely is thinking that you've probably read a Legion issue before this, right? Wouldn't you say?
Yeah. Because when I was reading this first issue again, and I haven't read it in decades.
Same.
So I'm reading it and going, this is a number one issue. So, I mean, it's totally antithetical to what happens today, I think, when someone puts out a new number one comic. At the very least, we get, with Marvel at least, we get this recap page explaining everything you need to know to get people in it, which it's not a complaint. I'm just saying that's kind of how new number ones at Marvel are kind of put out there these days.
Mm-hmm.
But this book, there are some things happening like mentions the Dreamgirl's vision. Actually, she calls it a prophecy in the story. So I read that in this first issue, and I'm like, wait a minute, this is a new number one comic, but it's acting as if it is the next issue of the previous issue in many ways. And so I had to go pull out issue 313 of the previous volume of Legion of Superheroes to see are there direct ties to what's going on in issue number one. And indeed, at the very least, the prophecy that Dreamgirl has is in that issue.
I mean, there are characters in here that aren't in costume, and if you don't know who they are by their code name or their real name, I mean, there's nothing to help you, right? And I don't think of that as a fault. I never really think of that as a fault, unless it's sort of confusing. I mean, to me, it's a group of large cast of characters, and the fun of it is learning who they are. Like, again, my first issue was Legion of Superheroes 304. Do you know what that issue was about? It was about the Legion Academy. It wasn't even about the Legion of Superheroes. So it's like, not only are you trying to figure out who the main characters are, now we got a whole bunch of supporting characters. And I loved it because to me it was like, oh, I get to figure it out, or I have to figure it out, or let me read some more comics, So, yeah, it's a first issue. Paul Levitz, Keith Giffen. I mean, they're not slouches, and this is the height of the Legion in terms of publishing. I mean, they were the number 2 book at DC at this time, with New Teen Titans being the number 1 book, and they very much wanted to give a story that didn't talk down to readers. And I was surprised after I read this first issue, just to give like a quick overview of how interesting it actually was. And there are some things in it that I'm like, wow, you know what? A new reader is definitely not going to understand that. Nope, they're not going to know that. But you have this interesting switch between some character stuff, some character interplay. Obviously, there's some drama and some fight scenes in it. Some of the fight scenes feel like we joked about Microlad, right? Like that feels almost comical, kind of lighthearted. And I think it has less to do about Microlad and more about like, let's showcase the new Shrinking Violet. Let's showcase Starboy and Dreamgirl, But then you get another
a couple more fight scenes later on that are serious, sometimes deathly so. And I like that balance. I like that the writers, the creators can that they kind of can switch back and forth and create drama. Paul Levitt certainly is no stranger to that. Keith Giffen as well. So, like I said, as I read it, and I'm certain I'm reading it with rose-colored glasses and with nostalgia and all that. But as when I got done, I said, "Oh yeah, that was that first issue, wasn't it?" What did you think of it as a whole?
Well, it was really kind of strange for me to go back to this after, like I said, it's the first time I've read it in decades. But I don't know, the certain comics I have such a vivid recollection of, and this one is one of those. So even though I said before that there's a large portion of this volume of the Legion of Superheroes that I have not read, this one I did. When it was published back in 1984, I picked it up. I was reading the other volume, of course, at that time. And, I knew about this new Baxter edition of the Legion of Superheroes, just like I knew about the new Teen Titans. And I bought that first issue. And the weird thing, Peter, was that for some reason I decided I'm not going to continue buying this Baxter version because I knew at that time, and I'm not sure how I knew. I think maybe it was in the letter. Yeah, it was one of the previous issues, 312, I think it was, of the other volume, where they announced this, or at least they were talking about it to make sure that we readers knew that what they were up to.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it was Paul Levitt's in the letter column there was talking about it, how that in 12 issues from then, they were going to start reprinting the stories that in the Baxter version in the what would then become the Tales of the Legion of Superheroes.
Right.
And so I decided that I was going to wait for some stupid reason. I think mostly because the Tales book was a bit cheaper because the Baxter comic was $1.50 and the Tales was 75 cents.
Right.
So, why would I pay double for the same comic? But like I said, I did buy this first issue, and it has always stuck with me all these years, in part because of the interesting cover. There's a couple things about the cover I just find really interesting. Maybe we'll talk about those. But then also just the quality of the work on the page. They weren't kidding when they talked about how the Baxter stock, this thicker, whiter paper, really made the art stand out.
Yeah,
and especially because I pulled out the reprint issue that I have, which is issue 326 of the Tales of the Legion, and comparing the print job between the two, it is like universes apart in quality.
Right.
And I think that's in part why I decided, years later, that I went back and bought all of the Baxter issues of this volume of the comic, because it was just so much better. But I did enjoy it. There's a lot of stuff in here, like you said, all the various plot beats that you mentioned. What really struck me is Shrinking Violet's. It's not her return after what happened with her in the previous volume, but it is a continuation of that, because in one of the other previous issues of the previous volume, we see her. She's been healed. She's got a new costume, but
new haircut.
Yeah, exactly. She's almost a new character. Not even almost. She's a new character with the same name, but in this comic, you really see the depth of what happened with her before come out and how much it's affected her. And out of everything in here, other than the scene at Takran Galtos with the Daxamite and what happens there, I think the stuff with Shrinking Violet really struck a chord with me.
That's cool. All right, well, we'll get into that as we go through some of the issue. You said you had stuff about the cover?
Well, I was going to ask you a question about it, but I wanted to point out real quick. I think if memory serves, and my memory is usually notoriously bad, but this is probably the first time I ever saw a silver print on a comic, because the masthead, the title, is this silver color on it, on the cover, and I just thought that was really cool.
Yeah, it's kind of like pre comic cover gimmick. Well, you know what? Now that I say that, whenever DC would do their like, hey, we're celebrating a 50th issue or 50th anniversary, I think they also used gold at that time. Like they used, I'm thinking about Tales of the Teen Titans 50 with Donna Troy's wedding. That had gold print. I don't know if the Legion of Superheroes issue 300 had any kind of like special print. I can't remember. But I do remember Tales of the Teen, which actually chronologically comes out after this issue. So I'd be curious to go back and look at some other anniversary issues. Maybe this is the first one that did that. That would be kind of interesting to discover.
Wait, so are you saying that the new Teen Titans Baxter first issue came out after the Legion did?
No, the Tales of the Teen Titans, the wedding issue.
Oh, okay. Sorry.
Right. Yeah, that came out like in another because right now, Legion #1 of the Baxter Run and New Teen Titans #1 of the Baxter Run came out relatively the same time, and Tales of the Teen Titans at this time was just after the Judas Contract, so that puts it at like issue 45, 46.
Right.
So the wedding issue is soon after this. But I know there was a World's Finest Comic issue probably around this same time or maybe right before it. And that hit issue, well, I want to say 300. Yeah.
Yeah.
And that might have some kind of special ink.
I think you're right. I have that issue. I'm
Yeah.
pretty sure that you were correct about that.
Yeah, it had that little gold metallic ink. I'm looking at the cover right now. Yeah, that's. I dig the cover. I don't know why. It's not violent, but it's like dramatic, right? In your face, and look at Colosso Boy with his face all in rage. You have characters in here that don't even show up in the issue, like Timberwolf. No, not Timberwolf. Block and Dawnstar and Wildfire.
Yeah.
Yeah. And look at Mon-El. Like he's like sort of covering his face, but right away, like if you see his hair, Mon-El's hair, it is really black. It's like a flat black. And in the issue, I dug that, like Shadowlass at times. The coloring with her is really black to the point that sometimes when her cowl is up around her head, you don't even see her hair. It kind of blends in with the cowl. Yeah. And you just see the blue of her face. And, you know, this is, like you said, the execution, the production values of this book are very, very noticeable right away, especially if you were reading the newsprint stuff from the Tales of the Legion of Superheroes, or like the scene on Wyneth with Light Lass, and she's like under a canopy of leaves, and there's like this real shadow effect all over the place, and they're like purposely going, you know, we don't want it to be clear, we want it to be shadowy. So the cover has always been one of my favorites for the Legion.
Yeah, it's funny you mentioned that particular the scene. You call it Wynath?
Yeah, yeah.
See, I always pronounced it Wynath.
So they address that in Legion of Three Worlds around the time of Final Crisis.
Okay.
Where they brought all the different various versions of the Legion from the different reboots, right? And one of the reboots calls it Wynath. One of it calls it Wynath, but the more established Legion they addressed it as being Wyneth.
Huh. Okay.
So, and I think that was part of the joke of having that scene is because nobody knows how to pronounce it.
Much like many of the characters' names and other home planets as well.
Exactly.
That's part of the fun. I used to just a stupid aside, but it does have a Legion connection. I always pronounced Darkseid Darkseid for the longest time until I saw the Super Friends series where Darkseid appeared.
Mm-hmm.
And it took a long time for that pronunciation to worm its way into my brain to be, the correct one.
Right.
So I'm sure the same thing will happen with Wyneth now.
Or some of their other names or something like that. Yeah. Anything else about the cover?
Yeah, just so it's probably just a stupid little thing, but why do you think that they threw in 3 characters on the cover that didn't even appear in the comic?
Well, I sort of think that because this was a big deal for them, they needed a promotional image. They just needed a cover for the first issue. And I'm going to speculate that that's why they did that. So even today, right, I just found for the first time, and I sent it to you, and we can post it in the show notes. They used, there was a house ad, a DC Comics house ad that I had never seen before for this series. And it's from back issue number 68 from Tomorrow's Publishing, which is like a whole Legion-focused issue. So there was an article by Philip Schweier that featured this house ad for the Legion, and it's this cover, and on it says, "An epic for our time, from a time yet to come." And it's this cover, and then the background is like a whole bunch of years in the future, 2244, 2724, etc. Legion of Superheroes, deluxe format, #1. Interesting that they call it deluxe format. #1 from the new DC, There's No Stopping Us Now. So my thinking is they just needed an image to help promote it before maybe they truly finished the inside of the book. And knowing Keith Giffen from his interviews and stuff, and from like a few interviews I've done, I think I did one interview with him. He has his favorites, and he probably said, "Well, I'm going to draw my favorites on the cover." I don't, And visually, I think it's an interesting look too, right? Like Colossal Boy as a background character is awesome. Block is interesting. Wildfire, Dawnstar with her wings. That would be my guess.
That totally makes sense.
Yeah. You want to jump into the story itself?
Yeah, let's do it.
All right.
I have questions for you too.
Good. I love the opening sequence. So it's a book called Legion of Superheroes, and the first thing that you're introduced to is the Legion of Supervillains. And I thought that was great. I thought it gave a real nice sense of foreboding. It puts you right in the middle of like their plans. The threat is kind of laid out on the table right away. And just like with the Legion of Superheroes, one of their main characters is Lightning Lad. We kick it off with his counterpart and his older brother, Lightning Lord. And we learn that each member of the Legion of Superheroes has to kill one of the Legion of Superheroes. I thought it was great. Really, really nice intro to set the mood.
Have you read the Legion Companion from Tomorrow's, Peter?
No, and I was kicking myself that I don't own that.
Oh, you don't?
No.
Okay. So I was looking through my copy. Mm-hmm. Again, another thing that I bought in anticipation of us talking eventually. But there's a bunch of interviews in there with Paul Levitz and Keith Giffen. And I was looking specifically for things that they said about this particular relaunch of the book in the Baxter edition. And one thing that, because you're talking about the Legion of Supervillains here, mm-hmm. One of the things that struck me as really interesting was they wanted to do this big storyline with the Legion battling their villainous counterparts, because it's not something that Paul Levitz particularly likes to do. He made some mention of he doesn't like to do like big group things, which is why you get a lot of these Legion stories where it's just a handful of the total roster of the Legion, and doubly the same for the villains. So he would often pit the Legion up against one villain or just a handful of characters, because he just, for some reason, he just doesn't feel like he does a good job at doing large group stories. But because of this new book and what they wanted to, one of their goals was to basically push the boundaries of what they want to accomplish artistically, big A and little a artistically. So they decided they were going to do this storyline featuring the Legion of Supervillains. I just thought that was really cool.
And they haven't been shown often. I mean, a lot of the stories, I haven't read it, but I did a quick research of the Legion of Supervillains. It was really a concept that played out with the adult Legion of superheroes. So they would have like these imaginary stories about the Legion of superheroes as adults, and that's where they really fought the Legion of supervillains. And I think there might have been one or two stories of the Legion in present day when they would actually fight some version of like the Legion of supervillains. But this is like the biggest, boldest grouping of those characters. So, I mean, it sort of makes sense, especially after, the Great Darkness saga for the Legion is a huge, huge storyline, and you got to do something to drum up excitement. So why not use, the arch villains of these characters, bring them together and throw them against. It's interesting that Paul Levitz would say that, though, because, I mean, this whole book is an ensemble book. I mean, I sort of understand what he says. He only used a few at the time, but it's still a large cast of characters.
Mm-hmm.
And all of them at this point, Paul Levitz really has a good grasp of their voices, their characters, their interactions with each other, the way they joke with each other, the different romances. I mean, that's why he wrote this book for about 100 issues or whatever it was.
Maybe he's just being modest, but yeah, because you're exactly right. He had a grasp on these characters and just the concept in general that few have been able to challenge him with,
right?
In their telling of these characters, the telling of the stories of these characters.
Yeah, I mean, even in this first sequence, these first 3 pages, Lightning Lord is sort of setting the tone, but in a way, he's almost talking to himself. The panels where he's talking to the other members of the Legion of Supervillains, the panels are rounded. So that means that's a flashback. He's actually remembering when he took the blood oath to say that he's going to kill his brother. And then it goes back to him because in the regular page, he's looking out the window, right? And he's just sort of talking to himself, or maybe he's talking to somebody in the background. But in this sequence where he does the blood oath, he's on a balcony and it's not raining. But when he's at the window, it's raining and there's a thunderstorm. So right there speaks a lot about Paul Levitz as a writer.
Oh my God, Peter, you just blew my mind. I totally missed that.
Yeah.
That makes so much more sense now.
Mm-hmm.
Son of a gun. It's amazing what you find out 35 years later, something like that.
I mean, that's a tool that not a lot of people use anymore, the whole rounded panel thing to suggest something that happened, previously.
Well, there's also a later thing that I'll bring up when we get to that, but also panel borders are played with in this issue. So
yeah,
I'm really embarrassed that I missed that.
No, I wouldn't be. I'm sure as a kid I didn't realize that.
Well,
it just sort of felt
a kid, sure, but even now, I totally missed that on my reread for this.
Yeah,
and notice too, since we're talking about panels on the page, one thing I love about this book, and I totally missed this, when I first read it, but rereading it again here, Giffen is playing around with the white space between the panels on here. There's, if you think of maximizing your page to get as much or the most amount of images on a page to get your, quote unquote money's worth out of your comic, he's disappointing you in the sense that he's got all these different shapes, different sizes of panels, and things are grouped in such a way. And I'm looking at page 3 here, where there's a bunch of white space here, but he's directing your eye. He's giving us a tone by doing this, and I don't know that I remember seeing that in like the previous volumes issues. Now I want to go back and take a look at that, but and I'm also curious to see if this kind of experimentation or just playing around on the page continues.
Yeah, it's one of the reasons he really wanted to work on the Legion in the first place, because he felt he could do things like this because it was a series set in the future. And I think I even read an article where he said, he sort of felt like other artists didn't really take advantage of the fact that it was in the future. Not even in terms of like sci-fi technology or anything like that, but just, like look at the next sequence, the next scene with Starboy and Dream Girl. And this is where we get Microlad, which we talked about. They're on the planet called Ventura, which is like a Las Vegas planet, or like think of like in Star Trek, Risa, planet where everybody goes to relax, or I don't know, it's like a pleasure planet almost. That first establishing shot of all the buildings is cramped and weird, and the architecture doesn't make sense, but it's the future and it's not supposed to make sense. And it's these pages are stuffed. There's a lot of information here, visually. And it's not always the easiest to look at or read, but I think the challenge is what makes it so great. I think what he brings to the page is storytelling, that close up. I mean, he's in his Jose Munoz phase right now. If you don't know who that is, that was an artist that Keith Giffen basically ripped off, and he freely admits that he was looking at Jose Munoz. He was an Argentinian artist. Sin City was very inspired by his artwork. So if you know Sin City, like all that black and white noir work, I think they call it like chiaroscuro artwork or something like that. He was inspired by it, and he was totally ripping it off in this. Close-ups of faces and eyes, the heavy black inks and all that. Like, that was it. He was like all about it. And freely admitting that he was ripping it off. But it was a good storytelling feature.
That's one of the things I like about Giffen is that he freely admits this, that he's, inspired by, if not ripping off, by another artist. And that scene where you talked about the buildings, that establishing shot, that kind of reminds me of Kirby, in the sense of the busyness, the circuitry, that kind of stuff that Kirby liked to do, liked to play around with, liked to show us. And considering where Giffen goes with his art as the series continues, especially in like the 5 year later part, and right. even later, like I'm thinking of the Legion of Supervillains special that they did around maybe right before the New 52, or it was somewhere in there, or maybe it was after the New 52 that he did. I mean, to me, he's definitely channeling Kirby to some degree in his later work.
Oh yeah, he was a Kirby clone when he first started. Like his Defender stuff. He again freely admits that when he worked for Marvel, that was the house style. Like you just had to sort of ape Kirby. So that sort of bombastic artwork, I know that issue you're talking about. He definitely has put that in his toolbox, and that's why I think he's such a dynamic artist. I think that's why he's such a good storyteller. Like his sequentials are interesting. And he does a lot of breakdown work that for other artists that you can see what kind of storytelling artist he is.
There's a couple things in this first page of that next sequence on Ventura. This was a staple in the Legion comics, where we get these little caption boxes that give us bits of information about place or certain characters. Usually it was the Encyclopedia Galactica, I believe, that we got a lot of excerpts from. But this one is the UP Economic Statistics about Ventura. So that was one of the things I loved about Legion Comics, is that we get just a few words, a paragraph, essentially about basically setting us in place. What is this place? What is it about? Totally superfluous, given what we read on the page. I mean, we could get that, anyway, without having the caption box. But it's like going home from college, going back home for the first Thanksgiving, and you walk in and your mom's baking apple pie or whatever, and it's you're home.
Right.
And to me, those little caption boxes, coming back to this again, it's like, oh, I'm home with the Legion. It's so great.
And look at this first page. I mean, they don't even call each other Starboy or, I guess no, there is one narration word balloon that says, the room clerk told me it's Starboy and Dream Girl, but they call each other by their names, Nora,
yes,
and Tom or Thom.
I love that. I love that they started doing that. Because it never made sense to me that when superheroes, whether it's the Legion or the Justice League or the Titans, where if they're just hanging out, why would you not call Dick and Joe, things like that.
Yeah.
It's just I love that they started doing this, even though I think that it's kind of impenetrable for new readers coming in with so many characters, and the fact that they have these weird names, and the characters are using those instead of the perhaps more well-known superhero names. But I totally love it.
Yeah, and you get it in these pages. I mean, they mention that she's had a prophetic vision, like you said, that one of the Legionnaires is going to die. We get Micro Lad, who is robbing the cashier of this casino, and right away you get Starboy's powers. Obviously, when he sends off his little beams, things get heavy because either because of gravity or whatever. And we see that Micro Lad can shrink, and Dream Girl can foresee everything that this battle bot can do, so she can outmove it and outgun it and take it down easily. So that to me that's good writing. That's good writing right there.
Is this the first time we've seen Dream Girl use her abilities in that way?
Oh, I mean, there's so much I haven't read that I would have no idea.
It struck me as, again, bad memory and whatnot, but it seemed to me like, or at least I was remembering that was probably the first time that I'd seen her used in that way, and I thought that was really cool.
Well, I mean, her powers didn't ever really seem that immediate, right? It was always she had to put herself to sleep, so that she could
totally uninteresting visual.
Yeah,
if you have to sleep to use your power.
It wasn't so offensive, she didn't use it for the offense like she's doing here. Which, if that's a way to, I've read in a couple of places that the creators had a Legion Bible that was like pages and pages and pages long of locations and costumes and character stuff. So, it's an interesting way to grow the Legion, grow these characters a little bit, move them away from just their simple powers and try to give them something more.
And I mentioned the art on the Baxter paper. The one thing that, especially comparing it to the Tales issue, is the use of Tom's power, Starboy's power, where you get this gray, kind of spotty looking. You know, it kind of looks like we're looking at part of space in a way. Whereas in the Tales book, it's really dark and muddy and not very visually interesting looking. But I again, like with Dreamgirl's power, I think maybe this is the first time we've seen Starboy use that kind of grayish, I don't know, beam or whatever. I'm not even quite sure how to accurately describe it, but I always thought that was cool.
Yeah. It's good. The visual language of the Legion of Superheroes is very important.
Mm-hmm. And then it's mirrored. You know, you have a little bit of these dots within that gray area of his power, and then you go to the next scene, which is Colossal Boy and his wife Yura, and then you get Computo with his little Kirby Crackle look.
Yeah. That's an interesting thing too. Scene again, because it's they're not in costume, and the only thing you can either recognize visually is that I never know how to say his name, if it's Gim or Jim. I assume it's probably Jim.
Yeah, I always pronounce it Jim.
Yeah, but it's spelled Gim. He has his Colossal Boy emblem on his lapel, and you know, every Legion member, if you go back to the first page, has their own little icon that represents who they are on what's called the mission monitor board. And his is this, well, it's a symbol for a man. It's the symbol for a male, but it's like rather enlarged, and it has an arrow going in one direction. So it's kind of to suggest that this man can get bigger, and there it is on his lapel, and that's the only way that's the only visual cue you have that this is Colossal Boy.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, and his face is covered in both panels that he's shown.
Yeah,
which is weird. You normally wouldn't get that, I wouldn't think.
Yeah, I think part of it too is that he's trying to sneak out a little bit, not sneak out, but he's trying to.
That's true.
Yeah, he's trying to get the hell out of there. He's finally grown up. He wants to leave the Legion headquarters. He's got a new. Are they married yet? Yeah,
I think so.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, because they were married under false pretenses when Yura was pretending to be Violet.
Right.
And he stayed with her after he found out the truth.
Yeah.
Which I thought was always a really cool thing that they did. You know, they could have just as easily written Yura out after that storyline was over.
Yeah.
And yet they continued on, and I thought that was a rather, you know, adult way to approach the situation for a bunch of future teenagers.
And look at like the Legion of Superhero, the headquarters. You don't even see the full effect of it. You just see sort of like it's just like a portion of it.
Yeah,
so,
you would think that there would be like this grand shot of the Legion headquarters in the first issue of the new book, but there's just so much going on here.
And Computo as the major domo of the headquarters is always such an interesting concept, considering he's been a villain in the past and now he's like this floating butler.
Did you notice? Speaking of Computo, there. There's the whole Interlac alphabet that is prominent in this issue and many others, of course. But that Ventura scene, I was going through and translating all of the signs and whatnot, trying to see what things were saying. Maybe there were some hidden messages or jokes or something.
Right.
Which there aren't, as far as I know. But I noticed though that Computo here is shown with, it's C2.
Yeah.
The designation there, Computo 2. I thought that was, it's one of those things that I hadn't noticed before when I read it the first time, and I just thought that was cool. Can we go back to that first page and that wheel?
Mm-hmm.
So I forgot to mention this before. So I was going to challenge you to name all of them, or I know you can name all of them going around the wheel, but I was going to see how fast it took you. So you could decide if you want to do that or not.
I mean,
But,
it's everything. It's all the Legion.
But yeah, but so you have the outer wheel. I just just thinking about this from a logical standpoint.
Right.
So one of these guys made this wheel, and they put all the Legionnaires around the outside of the wheel, and then somebody thought, hey, we have the reservist Legionnaires. We got to kill them too, but we're out of room, or we don't want to resize everything, so let's put them on the inner circle.
Right.
I just thought, somebody's really thinking about this a little too much.
Yeah.
Maybe it's me.
It's an interesting look, though. I always like.
Oh yeah. I'm guessing that Giffen had a lot of fun designing that. Again, I see a lot of Kirby here with that face in the middle.
Yeah.
It's very fourth world source wall kind of stuff to me.
Right. Interesting mosaic.
Yeah.
Yeah.
All right. Well, let's keep pushing through so we don't get too caught up in.
Mhm.
So we get an interlude. We get one of those captions again. So this next sequence is playing off of the events from the Great Darkness Saga, where the Legion of Superheroes are finally done terraforming the planet Daxam because Darkseid had shaped it. He had his minions shape it into the face of Darkseid. And again, this is like you said before. This you wouldn't know this unless you were a reader of the Legion of Superheroes. But it's an interesting character piece. You get Mon-El and Shadowlass. They're a couple. Ultra Boy is obviously someone who's very powerful. Chameleon, the Chameleon Boy, the way they talk to each other. There's Timberwolf. There's just some interesting camaraderie going on here, but also some playfulness that I really like about that sequence.
That and Ultra Boy being kind of introspective. He crushes that rock. Cam says something about another rock or something, and Joe says, nope, it's another handful of fresh earth. And then there's a later scene in the same issue featuring Ultra Boy that I want to talk about because I want to believe, Peter, that Ultra Boy was a favorite of both Levitz and Giffen, especially when you flash forward to the 5 year later run, at least that first arc essentially, that prominently featured Ultra Boy, which I totally loved because he's my favorite Legionnaire.
And then they get a warning that something bad is happening on Takran Galtos, which is the prison planet. I always like Takran Galtos. I always like the prison planets. That and Labyrinth. Yeah. And
then there's probably my favorite scene in the book, and which I alluded or talked about a little bit before. But this is Microlad versus Shrinking Violet, and it's only essentially 3 pages. This little confrontation, but that first page, I love the shadows in this. The darkness, the surprise. You turn the page and we see Shrinking Violet for the first time in this issue so far, I think, right?
Yeah.
And then Microlad shows his utter disdain for her, because they have a history from like I said before, she was replaced by Yura in a previous storyline, and Microlad had something to do with that. I don't remember the details. So here's Shrinking Violet giving a little payback, and boy, howdy, does she show some fighting skills that I don't think we've ever seen from her before.
Yeah, it's great. And it's a great use of not only the fighting, but also because they're small and then they can grow big. She makes a point of saying that she is totally outclassing him when it comes to using their powers in combat like this. And we've seen her, like you said, we've seen her in the Tales of the Legion of Superheroes We saw her get a new look. We saw her confront an ex-boyfriend. But if there's any doubt, previous to this, there's no doubt anymore that she's a new character. She is not one to mess with, and she's not going to be she's kind of moved away from her trauma, like maybe she's finally healed both physically and maybe not so much mentally, because I know there's some stuff that will come up, but she will not let herself be tortured or used again.
And you mentioned too the Mon-El, his hair being just black, and we get that with her too, which is curious, because on the next page that I'm looking at here, there is a character called Sarah who has the traditional black hair, but it's that blue tinged hair that we always got in comics for people that had dark hair.
Right.
So it's interesting that so far up to this point we've seen characters with black hair, and it's black. It's not this blue tinge thing that we're used to seeing. But yet there's another character that does. So it was an interesting, I don't know, to me it's an interesting visual as to the choices that they're making about little things like the color of a character's hair.
Yeah.
That I don't think we really get, maybe not so much got in the previous volume of the series.
Yeah.
I don't know if it has, does it have to do with the fact that it's the Baxter paper? Probably.
I think they knew that this was a special issue. They had to step up their game. They wanted to step up their game, I should say. They knew that this book was important. So everybody, I think that's why the artwork is the way it is, the story. It's an important issue. And Microlad getting caught or getting teleported away, like the building of the Legion of Supervillains is definitely beginning.
This is really the first time that the Legionnaires get an inkling that something's going on, right?
Yeah, there's been hints. There was hints like scattered in the previous volume, but it wasn't in front of a Legionnaire member, I don't think. But even here, they're not quite sure what's going on. Later on, we'll get a scene that they obviously figure out what it is then.
Yeah, because Microlad gets sucked into what looks like a portal, and you get this voice coming through, coming to us must be, Microlad, vengeance to be done. And it's sort of cryptic, but at the same time, why is this guy announcing? And it's even worse later in the issue, where basically they announce that they're forming the Legion of Supervillains right in front of the Legion of Superheroes. Now, maybe that's a psychological thing, or maybe it's just because of the that particular character on the villain side who just can't seem to shut his mouth. I don't know, but it always struck me, again, it's one of those logical things that I get kind of sucked into. Is why would you do this when you're trying to kill the Legionnaires? Why would you give them a warning?
Drama. It's all for drama.
Yeah.
This scene on Wyneth, we get another attack from a member of the Legion of Supervillains, this time with a character that is normally could be looked at as being like sort of silly, that Radiation Roy, but he takes out Light Lass violently, and it's interesting because they know that Lightning Lord wants to go after Lightning Lad, but then they kidnap her. So we've already seen like one connection to the Lightning family, and Lightning Lass is the sister of Lightning Lad. So I thought this was interesting that they went after her. It seems very calculated and very harsh almost, the way it's done. But as we'll find out in later issues, the writers definitely had a plan for her.
It's interesting too, like you say, with Radiation Roy, I got the impression that earlier on in the issue, when we were with the villains and with Lightning Lord, I think they say something about each one of them chose their victim.
He said the others might have had to consider their choices. But,
yes, okay.
But mine was predestined from his miserable birth.
Exactly. So, I don't know. Is there a history between Radiation Roy and Light Lass that I'm forgetting about? It just seemed odd that pairing.
Well, that's why I think it's not necessarily. Part of me thinks that, like, again, it's been a while since I've read the later issues, but he didn't kill her, right? And that's what the vow is, that you pick a Legionnaire and you have to kill him or her. So he didn't kill her. He blatantly captures her and says, "I have Light Lass." So I forget, like, is this the way? Because the Legion of Supervillains in the beginning, in that first sequence, they say to Lightning Lord, you're going to go through with this, right? You're not going to have any sudden weakness because he's a family member. So is by kidnapping Light Lass the Legion of Supervillains' way of making sure that he goes through with it, so that maybe they have like blackmail material on him, or they say, well, let's kidnap her, because if he doesn't go through with killing Lightning Lad, maybe we will kill Lightning Lass. So I forget how this plays out. So maybe that's something we'll have to look for in the next couple issues.
Well, and that's the thing too, because like I said, I haven't read this storyline in decades. I honestly do not remember what happens after this first issue. There's something coming. There's something coming up. That's the Legionnaire who dies. I know that.
Yeah.
I know that's that plot point. But beyond that, I really do not know where this is going. So this is going to be fun to explore this.
Yeah.
But I had that in my notes too. When I got to this scene, I'm like, I thought they were supposed to kill him. So what is the deal here with Light Lass? And are they going to do this with other Legionnaires? So
yeah. So I think they're just taking her for insurance. I don't remember, so we'll have to follow up on that. But I think the other thing with this scene, obviously, is the subplot that there's somebody looking. There's like somebody looking on at her. Like he says, "I found her. I better report in." It's only like 3 little panels on that first page, and then you don't see this character again until later on, and you don't find out what it's about, and you're not going to find out at all until they get to an annual way down the way. So we'll talk about that in a couple more pages when we see this character a little more clearly.
How much do you like this next page, the shot of the Legion cruiser from the top down?
Yeah,
I love that.
Different camera.
I love how Giffen is playing with that kind of stuff.
Yeah,
giving us different angles and it's just playing with perspective in the way that he does from that angle. I just dig it. It's really cool.
Or look at the next panel where the Legionnaires are all there, like the third panel, and they're all in silhouette. So you have no idea. You just have to know who Chameleon Boy is, right? Like you have to know who he is by his silhouette to know that he's talking because he has antenna. You have to know who Shadowlass is because she has that big cowl.
And speaking of her cowl, you mentioned before how her, the use of blacks with her and how her hair just melts or not melts, but blends in with her cowl.
Yeah.
And you get that great tiny little panel there at the bottom of the page. This guard character dies from this attack from the Daxamite that we're going to see in a minute. And, she's looking down and very forlornly, just announces he's gone, and she's literally shrouded in shadow, in darkness. And yes, it's she's Shadow Lass, but I really dug the way that they decided to color that particular tiny little panel to strengthen that scene, to give it a bit of emotional weight.
Yeah, I don't remember Olvir from. Who's the young Daxamite that is destroying Dacron Galtos, and then in this sequence he kills a prisoner or a guard. I don't remember him from the Great Darkness saga. It's been a while since I've read that, but he's a Daxamite holdover from when Darkseid took over Daxam, and he's a little bit of a punk.
Wasn't he the young Daxamite in I think it was on Takaran Galtos where when Chameleon Boy was briefly imprisoned there and he didn't have his powers then, and I think he was fighting against this character. I don't remember now. I'm probably mixing it up, but I seem to remember seeing this character before.
Yeah. But Mon-El certainly takes it to heart because he's a Daxamite himself. And
because then he. I love that. I'm glad you recognize me. I'd hate to break every bone in your body without you knowing who did it. And the guy is like, whatever, you stupid Legionnaire, and Mon-El just attacks him. This is not the heroic Daxamite that I'm used to. The guy who usually is very contemplative and very thoughtful. He's just reacting emotionally to this horrific thing that this a representative from his planet has done.
Yeah,
and I really dug that.
Well, I got that sense about Mon-El from this run, especially later issues, but also in the 5 years later, that DC around Zero Hour, so we're talking like the early 90s, they really they were like making this little push to consider Mon-El the most powerful humanoid in the universe. So when he was known as Valor in the early 90s, right? Even more powerful than Superman. He was called the most powerful humanoid in the universe. And I always like these moments of when he kind of goes against that heroic nature because he is someone who is so powerful. Like what must that be like to live with something like that? To know that you could destroy a world with, barely breaking a sweat. Mm-hmm. And this sequence, was just pretty horrific. This young Daxamite kills a guard. Whoever he is, Ultra Boy tries to save him, but he can't. And Ultra Boy's like kneeling over this charred body, and just like a good supervillain does, Olvir tries to pontificate about himself or whatever, and like you said, Mon-El just goes right on the offensive and attacks him. And a lot of this stuff, a lot of what we're seeing, shrinking Violet growing up, Mon-El, Jim and Yira, moving out, in the next sequence they move into their apartment, their new apartment in Metropolis. It really makes me feel like all of those imaginary stories that featured the adult Legion, this is the adult Legion.
Yeah.
A lot of times readers sort of think 5 years later is the one that grew them up. And it did, that they were much older. I think even Saturn Girl and Lightning Lad might have even been in their 30s during that volume. But I really feel like, no, they're not in their 30s and 40s in this thing, but they're not teenagers in this book. And that's what makes them interesting. I think maybe that's why I like this book so much. They're not the kids that are trying to play jokes on Superboy. They're legit characters and adults that have problems and have issues and that have feelings. So the tone of this book is, really spot on with that whole, let's try to make them more than just the boy, the girl, the kid, and let's try to give them something meatier to play with.
Yeah, it's really funny you say that because I was thinking along the same lines. I could totally see a through line from this first issue to the 5 year later Legion, and of course connecting thematically to the adult Legion stories of yesteryear.
Yeah.
And yeah, I was really digging that.
Yeah.
I really like this idea of, in all my comics, I always like the idea of seeing the characters grow and grow up. We saw that a lot with Dick Grayson under Marv Wolfman's and George Perez's handling in the New Teen Titans. And you see that here in the Legion. Maybe not as dramatically as with Dick, but you get that, just little bits like this. And they're really throwing it at us a lot in this first issue with Jim and like you said, the reactions of some of the characters. And yeah, that really connected with me and resonated with me even all those years ago.
I mean, what you said about Dick Grayson, I mean, this Legion is going to experience sort of like a change like that. It's kind of like shaking up the complacency. So Marv Wolfman creates that character of Tara to throw her into the mix of the New Teen Titans to kind of mess them up a little bit. And, the Legion, it has been so successful as adventurers and as protectors, and nothing bad ever happens to them. Well, this volume, there's a lot of bad that happens to them. And I think it's a way to show that I think when people think 5 years later, that they think that that's the volume that went a little bit overboard and trying to make so much drama. But I think he was just riffing off of stuff that he did with Paul Levitz. I mean, some of this isn't all that different. Trying to just show scenes like this next one, again, like we talked about, Colossal Boy and Yera moving into a new home. What's dramatic about that? Other than the fact that he sees that his mother, who was the president of Earth, she resigns, right? Like there's a point to this scene, but it's just a married couple moving into a new place. Like, what kid really wants to read that? But it has a point, and it's a different form of storytelling, and I think Keith Giffen is when you get to the 5 years later, he's just riffing on everything that came before. Like, he's like, no, I know how to write the Legion because I worked with Paul Levitz, who also knew how to write the Legion. Yeah, no, there's a lot of stuff coming up way down, of just like, oh, you thought the Legion of Superheroes was always about like utopia and characters where nothing bad ever happened. Well, we got something in store for you.
So, Peter, there's a couple things I wanted to touch on before we move on to the next scene here. I talked about the different how panels were on the page, and you mentioned the rounded corners of the panels. Mm-hmm. There's this one page here where we see Olvir kill another character, I presume a guard. But all of the panels on that page, except for one, maybe two, but they're kind of weird too. But they're all the panel borders are these black lines, but they're kind of wavy, going around. And I thought that was strange. I'm not quite sure how to take that, other than the heat from Olvir's heat vision. You know how heat will make things shimmer. Mm-hmm. When you're looking at it, looking at a fire, you look above it and you see things shimmer. I kind of don't think that that's all that's going on here. So I was curious how you took that. What do you think is going on here? Why did Giffen decide to shape the borders in the way that he did on that page?
I think it's for mood and atmosphere. If you ever read All-Star Squadron annual number, I want to say 3. It's this oversized annual where the All-Star Squadron is going up against a character named Ian Karkle, and it's a way to show various members of the All-Star Squadron as drawn by different artists. So, like, there's an Our Man chapter drawn by George Perez, and Jerry Ordway has a chapter in there. Well, there's a chapter with Dr. Fate drawn by Keith Giffen, and Keith Giffen used to draw Dr. Fate in a backup story. I forget what the main title was. Maybe Flash? I forget.
I think so.
Yeah. And in this All-Star Squadron issue, Dr. Fate is confronting Ian Karkle, and he's confronting him in a house made of human flesh. And all the panels are like squiggly and gross, and stuff is bleeding, and it feels cramped and shadowy. And I think that's what he's doing here. It's kind of sort of to suggest that there's something really bad going on.
That totally makes sense. But I guess jaded comic reader that I am, the callous murder of an unknown character that I've never seen before and will never see again. I kind of question the usage of the panels, the way that he did that, even though I recognize that he's trying to create this mood. I think perhaps the execution didn't quite meet the what we see on the page, I guess.
Yeah, I could see that.
Some of it too is I feel like had I just read the Great Darkness Saga and led up to this issue and go, oh my God, there's that young punk Daxamite again, and how often is it that you see the Legionnaires not able to rescue someone?
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, like the death itself may not hit, but that scene of Ultra Boy, because like when you go to the next, like if we skip over the interlude for a second, where Mon-El is fighting Olvir, and Ultra Boy is like still kneeling.
Yeah.
And all the other prisoners, they like sort of go, oh, he's out of it, just jump on him. And he's like, oh, really? Well, let me just shrug you all off. In fact, that's what So I like that, like it's giving Ultra Boy a little bit of it's like dramatic tension, it's not necessarily it's a good pace. It's something different with the Legion of Superheroes,
Oh yeah.
When do they ever experience defeat on that kind of level where they can't save anybody? And that's just going to be small fry compared to what's coming up in some of the later issues.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
Back on the Colossal Boy scene with the news about his mother, did we know already that he was Jewish?
Yeah, I want to say there's some previous issues where we've gotten some hints, and Paul Levitz is Jewish. So, and I don't know if Keith Giffen is, but I know Paul is because there's a couple character creations and some things that that he named to be sort of referencing some Jewish characters and stuff. So, or Jewish words or whatever. So, I don't know. I mean, maybe that might be something that might be interesting to go back and look. But if we didn't know before, we certainly know now.
Yeah, I wonder as things caught my eye when I was reading this issue. Is it really that important? And two, given the history of the Legion, not just my reading of the Legion before this issue, but all the decades before, there's just maybe I'm just trying to make connections where it doesn't really matter. I want to have a connection to the history in some fashion, whether it's an issue ago or 20 years ago.
Yeah.
And my brain is automatically trying to connect the dots for things that maybe aren't really all that pertinent. But
well, there is a backup story where Jim and Yura go to dinner with his mom. It's like the first time Yura meets his mom, and she thinks she's going to freak out, but she winds up giving her like some kind of present. And it's drawn by George Tuska. I'm pretty sure it's in one of the Tales books, or one of the issues prior to this. And there might be some reference there that about their Jewish heritage. But what's great about it though is her resigning as president. It's political, right? Like that's a political subplot. It feels like it's a little minor thing. But when you think about the Legion and their relation to like the United Planets and the government of Earth, having a new president who may not be fans of the Legion of Superheroes could be trouble. And I think that is something that happens later on, way later on. It's their relation. Again, if you want to touch on the 5 years later Legion stuff, I mean that book was way political at times. So. It feels like it's something very little. It's just like one of those. It's like a Chris Claremont X-Men subplot. you just read it and you're like, what the hell does that mean? And you won't know, you won't figure it out for another like 20 issues.
That's one of the things, though, I love about Levitz's plotting and his subplots and all that kind of stuff is that you don't always get the payoff immediately, but man, when you get it, it's like, oh my gosh, look what he did 10 issues ago or 20 issues ago or whatever.
Well, this next sequence where that same detective character that was looking at Light Lass, excuse me, Alia Rands. I mean, this subplot again, this doesn't resolve for like another year after this.
Yeah.
Now there are hints, but you got to really know your stuff to figure it out.
And it's good to see that private investigators are still alive and well in the 30th century. And then here's they're still we go back to them fighting Olvir, and this is the scene where he gets sucked up into that portal, and they're like stepping through. The guy the teleporter is saying stepping through and becoming a member of new Legion of Supervillains, and I think it's Shady who says the supervillains. Oh no,
right.
It's almost like the annoyance of this week. That's kind of the way it comes off to me, and it's certainly not going to be just an annoyance.
Yeah, I mean at this point we don't know. Like the danger really isn't there. It is. I do like that panel though on the next page, on the last page, where Mon-El tries to fly in, and the disembodied voice says no, but then there's a huge lettering effect that he sort of screams no. And again, it's not often that the Legion can't handle what's in front of them, and for them to open the portal that wide and take in a few more prisoners to be part of their team, and then to be able to shut out the Legion, it's cool. It's kind of cool.
Yeah, especially with two of the Legion's most powerful members right there.
Mm-hmm. What'd you make of so it ends with another going back to the castle where Lightning Lord is looking at this storm, in a very sort of like foreshadowing way. What'd you think of that? What do you make of those last couple panels there?
The way that Lightning Lord is rubbing that tile that's the symbol of his brother.
Mm-hmm.
He's saying it's a beautiful evening, isn't it? Simply beautiful, and he's rubbing that tile, and I don't know. I can't decide if he's looking forward to what's coming next or if he's dreading it.
Again, I haven't read these later issues, and I'm not trying to read them, for these episodes. I really just want to read the one issue. I just look at it and go, I think he's rubbing the blood off of the tile. Almost as if to say he's not going to go through with what they want him to do. Because if you go back to page 3, there's a lot of blood on the tile, and his finger would be right over one of a bunch of the droplets, and it's almost like, is he playing the Legion of Supervillains? Is he, what's his game? You never know with Mech, you never know with families. So that's an interesting panel. I don't think it's just him like rubbing it as if to say, ooh, soon it will be my turn. I almost feel like he really truly is wiping the blood away.
Well, and especially, I know where he ends up with the Legion, before they reboot it. So is this the beginning of that, or is it down the road after this storyline that he seeks redemption? And it would totally make sense if it's this, given your interpretation of those final panels.
I'm really interested to find out what his game is, and they even, like, Sun Emperor comes in and says, we got all these other members, but nobody makes reference that Light Lass has been captured. It's just curious. It's a curious ending. It's not necessarily helped by the artwork. There's a lot of questions, and I'm like, oh, see, now I can't wait to read the next issue just to see if maybe we follow up on that.
Now, Peter, are you messing with me? Do you know that Lightning Lord is going to side with the Legion eventually in this story?
No, I don't remember.
Because I honestly cannot remember.
No, I can't remember either.
Okay.
I don't think he does. I don't know that's why I don't know what to make of this. You know, that's something I didn't get when I was reading this as a kid. I didn't get how ominous Lightning Lord is. And there's an issue like around, I don't know, what is it, like 302 or somewhere around there, where all the Lightning Lad and Lightning Lord go at it. And
that's right.
Yeah, so I mean, we're talking like, a little more than a year prior to this. And but it's been years since I've read that issue, so I don't know. I forget. Of all the members of the Legion of Supervillains, I mean, Lightning Lord is one of the ones that gets a lot of attention. So, and we haven't even seen Lightning Lad or Saturn Girl in this issue. So it just makes me go, I do not know what he's doing there, and I want to know what's up with him. And maybe we don't get a payoff. I don't know. Like I said, it's been a while since I've read these issues. So, But it's good. It's a good ending. I like it.
Yeah, what a cliffhanger type situation, and a quiet one. That's as a kid. I'm sure I'm like, well, what happens next? Give me the big fight scene or whatever. But now and having been exposed to so many different stories, not just comics, but in literature and whatnot. After all these years, I really appreciate that kind of an ending, that ambiguous character study of an ending of this first chapter.
Even the whole revelation that the Legion of Supervillains are a team. The Legion discovers it, but we've already known it, right? So what are you going to do? You can't have some false cliffhanger. You can't have them like all show up and say, haha, we're here. We're the Legion of Supervillains. Well, yeah, we knew that from page 1. We knew that they were coming. So that's not the point, right? Like, I don't know what the point is. And I don't mean that negatively. I mean, like, yeah, there's a plan, but it feels like there's a lot of ulterior motives going on. Lightning Lord could just be using the Legion of Supervillains for whatever purpose.
Mm-hmm.
It's storytelling. It's a different kind of storytelling. It's a storytelling that I think they're just taking a chance with because they know they can.
I've always felt that the 5-year later Legion run was one of the better executed ones. But having read this first issue now and having this discussion with you, I see now why you like this particular run of the Legion so much. And I guess I just didn't appreciate it as much back then for some reason, and that was foolish.
When people used to really lay into the 5 years later Legion stories, I used to go, I don't know how you can be a Legion fan and think that the 5 years later was all that different. I mean, the Baxter run is dense, and it's only going to get denser. It's been decades since I've read these issues, so I'm really curious to see if this story succeeds by the end of the 5 issues.
So one of the things that was in the letter column that I think is a nice bookend to our discussion here is they were discussing the new format, saying this format will permit us to be a little more lavish in our stories and art and a little more daring in where our storylines go. And as a popular title, we felt the Legion of Superheroes deserved this format.
For comic historians, the editor is Karen Berger.
Yeah.
Who I think she edited Wonder Woman. She was editing, I know she edited Amethyst. She was the editor on Swamp Thing. I mean, she was on books that they were taking chances. I think this is why she was such a good editor for Vertigo, because she cut her teeth on DC comics that You know, they had a lot to say, and they weren't afraid to try things.
Yeah, think about that, Peter. What if she were editing the new Teen Titans?
Yeah.
I want to go to that alternate universe where that happened and read those comics again.
I have a couple reader reactions. So I went ahead to issue, I don't know if it was like issue 6 or 7. I think it was issue 6. I didn't read the issue, but I just read the letter columns to see what people thought of this issue. And they only had a few letters, but one of them was from a writer named Catherine, and she said, "This new fancy format stinks. The colors are great. The format is fine. The art is good. The plot is awful. You have got the Legion being about 3,000% grimmer than Batman has ever been. And what's with the violence? You seem to be using the more expensive format as a forum for depicting realism. There was no fun, no laughter, no joy in the first issue." And I read that and I thought, damn, this is even before 1986 where people thought comics went grim and gritty. But here she is, you know, she did not like this issue at all. I don't know. I mean, yeah, there's no fun, no laughter. I mean, there's some humorous moments in this book. I don't think it's devoid of humor.
No, not at all. And you know, we were talking about that scene on Daxam between the heroes. You know, those are just quiet, lovely moments.
Yeah.
You know, we don't get that many, granted, but those are. I don't know that we really got those in the previous volume. Maybe in some of the later issues leading up to the Baxter run, but I don't know. I'd much rather have something like that than lighthearted fun, you know, superhero fun that we may have gotten in previous issues.
Yeah. No, I mean, this book has always been a soap opera. I mean, I remember an issue prior to this volume where Dawnstar and Wildfire are having some fight, and he gets so mad that he blows himself up. And the sound effect says, damn, you know, like, or there's been tragedy, there's been quiet moments, people just sitting around playing video games or whatever. I mean, this book has always been a mix of different tones and emotions. You know, you talked about Ultra Boy on Daxam destroying that rock. So look at him there like someone who has that much power and who can create and help to restore life, or help to make it so that this world could find peace again. But then you juxtapose that against him not being able to save that guard, and what's all that power worth if you can't save anybody? You know, what's one more piece of dirt if you can't even save somebody to enjoy it? So
right,
that's not grim. I think that's an interesting exploration of a character, like you said, who's usually a dumb jock. You know, you didn't say that, but I mean, you know what I mean? Like he's not usually known for his smarts or for his introspective nature. So
right, exactly.
Yeah. So there was another feedback from another letter writer who I'm pretty sure was a letter hack in the day. His name was Rex Joyner, and he was asking. So apparently, the Legion of Superheroes, the Baxter issue would come out, and then a week later, the next Tales of the Legion issue would come out. And he was complaining because sometimes they would come out the same week. So they responded and said, since the titles come from different printers, Tales comes from World Color in Sparta, Illinois, and Legion of Superheroes comes from Ronald's in Montreal. In some stores, they arrive simultaneously due to the delivery dates of distributors and shippers. So I thought it was a nice little interesting look at that time of how many different printers they used, and that at this time there were different distributors. It wasn't just Diamond. So that's an interesting look back at the industry at that time.
Yeah. Yeah, I remember looking at, for some reason, I always was conscious of the fact that the comics were printed a lot in Canada.
Mm-hmm.
From my recollection. And I think now that at some point China was big in that in the comics industry for printing.
Yeah.
I don't know what it is today, but for some reason, back when I was a kid, I seem to be overly interested in where my comics were printed.
There's another estimate that I like too from one of the other later letter columns, especially in regards to like the idea of why are they sticking this Baxter run in direct sale only outlets as opposed to the newsstand. Why didn't they just stop the Tales book? And so they talked about if they would have done that, they would have lost a lot of readers, because at this time in 1984, estimates are that there were only about 2,000 to 4,000 direct sale outlets, whereas newsstand outlets, places that could carry comics just out, in the mainstream, there were upwards of 30 to 40,000.
Wow.
So sure, like a lot of those newsstand outlets are just little people on the corner, and those comics probably sit there and nobody buys any of them. But think of the exposure you get for 30 to 40,000 different outlets as opposed to 2,000 to 4,000 comic stores or direct sale outlets.
Right.
Because the direct market was really just sort of in its infancy at that time.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
So I thought that was an interesting factor. And for something like this that was very popular, I mean, they really had to, they were taking a chance of just putting these books in direct markets.
Yeah, they had no idea how it would go, right? And yet they're putting all this effort, all this creative energy into what is essentially a tenth of the potential spots where they could sell things.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah.
I don't think that they would do anything like that these days. Could you imagine that they put out a comic that would only be sold in 100 or 200 places?
Unfortunately, the nature of it is sort of that way because newsstands finally just said, no, we're done with comics. So,
yeah,
they almost had no choice. That's why digital, I think, is so important. It's like the new newsstand.
Mm. So one of the things, again, in that letter column, they talked about doing the Baxter issue, doing the Baxter run here, gives them the chance to jump into the format that offers creative folks the most potential in the medium today. We're planning on taking it to the limit. This is in that, I think that's the letter from the editor there. But so, what do you think? Did they deliver on their promise on this first issue? Based on what they said they wanted to, or where they said they were going to set out from.
Although I don't remember the specifics of the later issues, I do remember the feeling that these first 5 issues were big. Now they weren't necessarily as big as Great Darkness Saga,
mm-hmm.
but I remember walking away from these first 5, especially the later issues, with some of the artwork and what happens in it. And sort of thinking, man, we don't get stories like that in the Legion often.
Oh,
So yeah. Although I'm going to be a little biased with my answer, I do think they. I think they do. I think the storytelling nature of this first issue alone is miles ahead of books that we get now. Books that you finish reading in frickin' 3 minutes. You don't get the characterization. You don't get a book like this that treats the reader with respect. That they know you're a fan of this series. They want to hit things that they know you're going to like. If you're not quite sure of who is who or what's going on, it's not because the creators are being sloppy. It's because they just are. It's a pace. It's a pacing you have to give yourself over to. It's a style you have to give yourself over to. It's not wordy. It's not like Chris Claremont with all these narrations. The dialogue exists on its own. The artwork exists for you to figure it out. And It's the kind of book I like. It's, I like to dig into books like this. I've always liked books like this. When the
me too.
Yeah, when the X-Men did it right. Like my X-Men are when Chris Claremont and John Romita Jr. were on it, and he wasn't as narrative as he was in, during the John Byrne years. But even like the same thing, there were issues where they never even fought. They just sat around and played baseball or whatever, and I loved it. I love these big ensemble books that they don't look down at you.
Do we have big ensemble books like this anymore?
Yeah.
It seems like even the group books that we do have, they've broken up.
Yeah.
We have X-Men Blue and what is it, X-Men Gold, and
yeah.
The Justice League is the only other equivalent right now, I think, on the DC side.
Well, and
it's not that big.
Did you see the news? Well, you did. You reacted to it on Twitter as we're recording this. We're recording this on Friday, August 18th. I'm not sure when we'll release it, but Jim Lee tweeted out that he was having dinner with Mr. Jonathan Hickman, and talk about a guy who knows how to handle big casts and big ideas.
Kidding.
And I was like, please let him be in the running to write a Legion book. Because I think he'll do what we talked about. I think you and I mentioned where we were talking about Star Trek Discovery, how I'm disappointed that they decided to place Star Trek Discovery 10 years prior to the Kirk era, when they really should have gone the route of what they did with Next Generation and just said, F it, let's go 100 years in the future, 500 years in the future, whatever, and start all over again at somewhere new, And I'm hoping that if Hickman is writing the Legion or whoever, that they don't just try to make the old stuff fit into the modern sensibility. Like, just make some new characters, or push it another 1,000 years into the future from the future, and we get maybe some daughters and sons of the Legion members that we know. But I'm all about, like, just start new and fresh, and maybe that's something Jonathan Hickman will be able to do. If I'm just speculating, nobody knows what he's going to do, but
right. But we certainly, we want a new Legion book, right?
Sure, a good Legion book.
Well, yeah,
not just a rehash.
I don't want the Ultimate Legion, right? Like, I don't want what Marvel did with Ultimates, where basically the Ultimate Universe, where they just were basically telling the same stories in a modern setting. I don't want that.
Oh, yeah.
We shall see.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, that's our first episode. It's a little longer than I thought it was going to be.
Yeah.
But we had a lot of preamble stuff, and we'll get more specific, especially now that the next couple issues will play off of what we already talked about. So, what I do want to say to people who are reading, if you are reading along with us and you have questions, don't wait until we talk about that issue. Like, obviously the next episode is going to be about issue 2. So if you're reading it now and you have a question, send it right away so that maybe we can incorporate it into that episode, right? Or if, like, you're reading issue 3, issue 4, issue 5, and we haven't even recorded 2 yet, send us an email and say, hey, I'm reading issue 2, and there's something on this page that can you guys make sure that you talk about it or give a little bit of more of an explanation? So that way it's less about, like, feedback and more like an ongoing conversation. So I think that'll
give us time to contemplate the questions too.
Definitely give us feedback on this episode. Let us know what you think, if you've read these issues before, if you sort of feel the same or different. I'm not necessarily, maybe Eric, I don't want to speak for you, but I'm not necessarily interested if you like this episode or not. We've been in this game too long. Like, I could give a shit what people think, like, oh God, you guys are so boring. Okay, great. Don't listen. Great. There's other podcasts you can listen to. But like we don't know what this is going to be. We're going to feel it out for ourselves, but what do you think of the issue? Like, give us something to think about or something to talk about that maybe we didn't, or give us something to talk about for the next couple issues coming down the pike. Eric and I will probably do this if nobody listens. So if anything, we get to read Legion stories, which is fun.
And chat about it. So that's a good night's entertainment right there for me.
Yeah. And we'll get, like I said, we'll get more concise, and our plan is to we'll put this one out. We're going to put it out on both our respective feeds. And then down the pike, what we're hoping to do is to record like maybe 2 episodes in a night so that we have stuff in the can. I don't know what kind of schedule we're going to be on now. We'll wait to see what the next time we could record. That way it gives us, we can go at our own pace and try to get through at least the first 5 and take stock and see what we want to do, see how the podcast grows after that. So why don't you let them know where they can email you?
Well, you can email me at longboxreview.com, or you can also just message me on Twitter. That's usually a good way to get a hold of me. But if you have any questions or any long-form feedback, longboxreview@gmail.com. Whoops, I screwed that up. Longboxreview@gmail.com is where you want to email me. Longboxreview.com is the website where you can leave messages where this will be posted eventually.
And what do you got coming up on your show? I don't know when this is going to be out, but what have you done, or what are you looking forward to on your show?
Well, I have probably by the time people hear this, I will have already released our conversation about secret identities.
Cool.
And I'm also planning, I haven't recorded it yet as of this recording, but I'm planning on doing a something to do with Jack Kirby's 100th birthday.
Oh, nice.
What about you?
If people want to email me, it's peter@thedailyrios.com. I just, by the time this episode goes up, completed 4 what I'm calling breakdown episodes, taking a look at everything leading up to Metal #1 from DC. So the Ashcan, the Forge one-shot, the Casting one-shot, and then I'll tomorrow I think I'm doing a recording for Metal #1. And it's a detailed, a far more, a real in-depth conversation about what the hell these books mean and what they're hinting at and all this. And it's kind of fun. I always like doing those. It's sort of similar to what we did here, but, not, this one wasn't quite as in-depth. And purposefully so, right? We just sort of want to gush about the Legion. I'm sure we'll hit an issue in the future where we're going to be like, that issue sucked. But for now, for now it's kind of cool. So those are the big episodes I put out this week, and that hopefully people listen to.
And I'm not just saying this because I'm talking with Peter right now, but they're really good episodes.
Oh, cool!
If you like listening to someone talk about making connections to the greater DC universe and between various storylines and characters, and the history of the DC universe and how it's connecting to what's going on now and the future, Peter's your guy.
Thank you, Eric. All right. Well, cool. That was fun.
Yeah.
Yeah. We'll put this episode together and figure out how we're going to put it out. We're going to put it on both our feeds, but Eric and I will talk about that. And like we said, give us some feedback. And I think we've said enough. So why don't we say goodbye, and then we'll put this baby out into the ether and let them react.
Sounds good.
All right. Talk to you next time, Eric.
Thank you, Peter.
Yep.